So that happens a lot in mythology, where things happen that they don't make rational sense. But myths aren't really all that concerned with making rational sense, right? The story that's unfolding is kind of more, more important than the individual parts of it. Sam, you think of stuff in stories that don't make any sense?
Well, that and also they kind of just they sometimes cut to the end. They just have formulaic sort of things. I don't know if this is one of those or if this is one of those magical times where they're like, and then they picked up a rock and all of a sudden a palace was there with a whole party, and then kind of like a Cinderella type thing, or so sometimes that's just like tale magic, and then sometimes they're just kind of like formulaically getting to the end, letting you know that lots of time has passed or something like that with just a few doublets, right? Because a lot of this is oral. So they'll just say a few lines that will mean all this happened, which I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what that that part of the Ramayana. I haven't read it since I took your Asian humanities class.
Yeah, way back when, many moons
14?
ago.
14? I don't know. Yeah.
So I guess I should go over some just kind of basics for the idea. If I could get Ashley and Christine, if you guys can put your cameras on just for a little bit, and then we can take them off again later. Hello, hi. It's helpful for me anyways to sort of see who I'm talking to. But what we're going to do is we'll just have this general information, and then we'll go to cameras off, and Sam and I will discuss both the stars and the sun in mythology. And there's just an infinite amount of material, but we'll talk about, I don't know, whatever comes up. And then we'll have a Q&A period at the end where y'all can ask any questions that you had. I'll be making a study guide as we go along, because you'll have a quiz based on whatever it is that we talk about. I'm not even really sure what we're going to talk about. But this is the first time that we've done it. I am Jason File. I'm the teacher for this class, teaching at Sierra College for about almost 15 years now. A long time ago, I had this character here in one of my classes, and that's another story. Maybe we'll get to that. I have to tell you that story at some point. But anyways, became friends with Sam Shaw, and we talk about philosophy, mythology, religion, theology, the sympathetic nervous system, the amygdala, tapping. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah. So anything you want to say, Sam?
Just that I'm, essentially just a college student that has been studying for a long time and talking to people like Jason for a long time. And so I'm not it's mythology, so I don't think anyone's an expert on mythology because it's just so much, but I'm a person who's read and thought a lot, and I bet you guys probably have thought more and read more about certain aspects that are awesome. Anyway.
Yeah, everybody has a lot to bring to this conversation. You don't have to be a teacher or have a degree or whatever to, have insightful comments and reactions to mythology. But Joseph Campbell, you read when you were in high school, right? And he really kind of, opened some things up for you.
I had an English teacher my sophomore year in high school that taught English from the perspective of the heroes, from the Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell's Hero's Quest thing. And it was my introduction to mythology and stories, and like he made us watch movies and like Willow, and it turns out that Star Wars and Willow and George Lucas have all been influenced by Joseph Campbell. So when you watch movies and you analyze it by something it's based on, it's pretty easy. But that started me just reading and wanting to know about all this stuff. So and now I'm 34. So I was 14. So I guess I've been reading Joseph Campbell for 20 years. So.
And along with
everything else that
I. Yeah. Okay. So we'll just see if there's any other, any chance we could get Allison and Jenny to just pop in and say hi with your cameras. We'll turn them off in a second, but I just want to sort of see if I can see. If not, that's okay. It's not a requirement, but it does sort of help me form a picture of, who's here. Any questions from any of the students attending here? I mentioned before, but I'll say again, Anything you want us to talk about or questions before we get started? Okay, so yeah, so this is the first time we've done this, and we'll just see how it goes. We can go ahead and go to cameras off, and that's fine. I'll go ahead and turn mine off. I will actually be turning mine on and off, probably throughout. I started out this, when I designed this class, I designed it a year ago, and I've been really excited about restructuring it. Traditionally, when you take a mythology class, they just do Viking mythology and then Greek mythology and then Roman, and they just go by culture. And and that's fine, but there are also, topics within mythology that all cultures comment on. And I thought it would be a much more interesting way of engaging the subject of world mythology by going by topics. And of course, the first topic to come to mind is the universe itself, the universe that we're born into unwillingly. It's not we didn't choose this universe. It's just sort of given to us. And this is where we find ourselves with our particular form of human consciousness. And so the first topic to come up would be the stars and the sun, just the universe that we live in. And of course, every single culture throughout all of history has myths that are associated with the stars and the sun. And so I asked Sam, I have some stories to tell, and I asked Sam to find some. We don't rehearse this, and I don't know what Sam's going to say, and he doesn't know what I'm going to say. But we're just gonna sort of think about these things together and invite you along for the ride. So, Sam, what stories were sort of jumped out at you?
So, you want to do stars or sun first?
Let's do the stars first because yeah.
It seems right. I think
yeah,
it seems right.
I don't know why, but
it seems right. It seems like if you were starting at the beginning of mythology, it was probably maybe lying down like in that scene from Lion King, and they're looking up at the stars.
Yeah.
So that's so we can start. That's a good enough reason.
Good. Perfect.
By the way.
And by the way, just before we get started, if everybody could go on mute, that would be helpful too, because it actually helps the recording quality if we don't have ambient sound from other mics. So, okay, cool. So Lion King, is that what you did?
Yeah, I did. So I picked a constellation, an old constellation. I wanted to do the what's the most basic thing star-wise, the thing that just pops right out, and it's the Big Dipper and Polaris. Like the North Star and the Polaris is the star, and the Big Dipper or the Great
Polaris is like the official name of the North Star.
Yeah, right. So the North Star is Polaris, and the constellation that's associated with the North Star is the Great Bear and the Little Bear. If you're from the Western tradition, Greek and the Northern Hemisphere as well, because you can't see it from the Southern Hemisphere, of course.
Even and the Western tradition, but also Native Americans, right? It's not just European.
Oh, that's what I meant. I didn't. So in sort of like Greek, but all the traditions all across the world. So half of the Native American, North American cultures have the Great Bear be the big. The Big Dipper is the Great Bear.
Which is weird. So can I interrupt you for a second? That's always been really mysterious to me, that because I've seen pictures of that crap and I can't make a bear out of it. You know what I mean? Like, how does everybody just look up at those stars and go, "Oh, it's a bear"? You know what I mean?
The Dipper makes sense. It looks like a dipper. It's been called.
The Dipper makes sense. Yeah.
And it maybe looks like a plow. They've called it the wagon, and if you look at the North Star, all the stars go around the North Star, so it kind of looks like a wheel, a little bit, So that makes sense a little bit, but the bear doesn't really make sense, just to be so widespread across the entire world. It's the Northern Hemisphere, and across traditions, and so they know because it's both in the. It can't have been a what do they call it? Mutual, like just a coincidence, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So because it's in both the New World and the Old World, then that means it probably originated a long time ago before the natives the
So
native people went over there. That's about 14,000 years ago. When
yeah.
you the Bering Strait and the ice age, drying up the land so that people can cross, and the glacier melting. So we know
So
that
the Native Americans traveled over into the North and South America 14,000 years ago, and the fact
from
that
Siberia. Yeah.
yeah, from Siberia, and so the fact that Europeans and Native Americans have this myth would indicate that the myth is older than when they split up, right? Old is 20,000 years ago or something like that, and then they carried the myth with them to different places.
Right, exactly, and of course, like the myth changes, so they have what they call a Siberian version of the myth. I'm kind of jumping around here, but we haven't even told a myth yet. But there are a couple different versions, and they
Go
all
ahead and tell one. Yeah,
bears.
go ahead and tell
Just
one.
tell a story. It's a story rather than analyze something we haven't heard.
Yeah.
So I'll give like a basic version of the Siberian version, which would be like what the Finns believe. It was in Finnish lore. Lots of Siberian tribes, most of the North American, Native American tribes that do have this myth have this kind of myth. And it's that the dipper, the 4 stars that make the cup, usually represent a bear. And then the other stars represent birds telling hunters how to get the bear.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and so like Alcor, which is in a Greek version, a different character, is a bird, birds sort of leading people on this hunt. And there are lots of different versions of what happens and why and all that. But there always seems to be an element of like taboo, like the bear is very venerated, and killing it is you need to do it in the right way, and if you don't do it in the right way, it's bad, or you're releasing the bear ends up going into the sky because the bear is this venerated god type figure.
Yeah.
And then the Greek version is, I can just tell the Greek version because I am a classics major, so I know that one very well. So you have Callista the bear, or you have Artemis and Callista, and Artemis is the goddess of the wild hunt, and she's hunting with Artemis. Zeus, the sky god, who is an adulterous god, and the head of the gods comes down and eventually has I don't think he just has sex with her. He does one of his weird things to be adulterous, and
Zeus has sex with everything, whatever, if it's there.
Everything. And when he can't, he ends up accidentally making things. Oh yeah, all kinds of
Yeah, I know. Accidentally giving birth to random.
Yeah, it just his sexual energies are potent. That's what the word is, right? But so this woman is then cursed by Hera to be a bear, or by Artemis, because Artemis is a goddess of virginity and wildness and the hunt, and so she doesn't allow her. She doesn't see that as it's not something that she wants. So she punishes her, or Hera punishes her, becomes a bear. But of course, she has a child, and that's Arcus, who becomes a hunter. And then the hunter grows up and goes out and almost kills Mama Bear. And Zeus eventually finds out that the son is going to kill the mother, and it's all his fault. And he goes, well, and then throws them up in the sky and saves them by doing that. Yeah. And so that's kind of the Greek version of the story, and that's not while that is a version, that's not the version that spread. So you can tell that when I say Western, I mean sort of like it seems as though the story spread both into Europe and then Siberia and the New World, like Eastern and Western. Anyway.
Yeah.
And there are lots of different versions of that. And
Well, it's
yeah,
it's interesting because the story that I picked connects to Artemis too. Is the bear is Cassandra? Is that what you said? Or the girl who becomes a bear, or
hello,
whatever?
no, Callisto.
Callista, right, Callista.
Yeah, yeah,
So was she one of the daughters of Pleione and Atlas, or was she something else? Do you know? It doesn't.
I can tell you in
It
a
doesn't
second.
matter. Yeah, it's
I
fine.
mean,
So,
I don't have it memorized, honestly.
well, so the story that I picked is interesting too because I picked a different constellation called the Pleiades, and
Hmm.
the way that it goes in Greek mythology is that there was this Titan named Atlas, and he married a woman named Pleione, and they had 7 daughters, and these 7 daughters eventually got attached to the goddess Artemis. They were like her handmaidens or whatever, and they would follow her around and I don't know, help clean her hair, whatever. And one day there was a hunter named Orion, and he came upon Artemis and her 7
Hmm.
handmaidens, and he fell completely in love with the mother Pleione, who was there too, and he started chasing him. And they're running away from this hunter Orion, who's chasing this woman and her 7 daughters. And the chase goes on for something like 7 years, and eventually the woman and her daughters are so um, you know, frustrated that they're being chased all the time that they pray out to Zeus, and he gives them an escape hatch, and they float up into the sky and become this constellation called the Pleiades, which is 7 stars for the 7 sisters. And then Orion the hunter follows them up into the sky, and so every night, when you watch the stars, you can see Orion chasing these 7 sisters across the sky. And so that's another Artemis myth.
Hmm.
There's something that when I was researching this class the first time, I came across something that just boggled my mind, and it's somewhat similar to the bear Big Dipper story that you told, which you could go to a Native American settlement, and they would tell a story about the bear, and then you could
Hmm.
go to Finland and they would tell a story about the bear, and you're like, those are different countries. Like, that's a long way away from each other, right? Different
And they tell the
languages,
same story,
and they
yeah.
tell this, and they're telling the same story.
Or very close, or
Yeah,
just it's just so like you could tell they descended from. It's got to be something very close.
but this one is so weird to me because it doesn't seem like it could have been descended, because I was researching the Pleiades, and it turns out that the Pleiades is at the backbone, and I'm going to do a share screen here
Mhm.
um, and bring up a PowerPoint to sort of give everybody kind of at the map here. But the Pleiades forms the central, what's called song line of Australia. So Australians first got to that continent. If you look at the Aboriginal Australians, they're black. They're very dark skinned. And the thinking is that they basically left Africa and pretty much walked straight there. They didn't really stop many places. They kind of walked to Australia about 40,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, and they settled there. And then Australia, like the seas rose, and people just lived. Aborigines lived on the island for the last 40,000 years, relatively unchanged and without any contact from the rest of the world. And what they had are these song lines, and the song lines are like myths or stories or songs, and every little place along the way would have like a verse. And so you could learn a verse in one village, and then you travel a while, and then the next village would have another verse, and you could follow the myth or the verses of the story all the way across Australia, through different languages, through different traditions. And the myth that makes that central songline is the myth of the Pleiades. And it's this guy, their version of Orion is named Wadi Niatu. And Wadi Niatu sees these 7 sisters, and he starts chasing them. and they keep running from him. And as the story kind of unfolds, like if they're in the middle somewhere in here, there'll be like a line in the story where the seven sisters are like, where should we hide from Wadi Niru? And like, oh, not over there by those trees where there's low-hanging fruit. Yeah, you know why? Well, because there's like snakes and shit like that, right?
Yeah.
Like it orients people. It tells like where they find water and where it's safe and how to behave and how to have a safe journey and stuff. But the entire story is this one guy, Wadi Niru, chasing these seven sisters across the continent of Australia. And I just became very, very mystified as to how it could be that this Australian culture tells basically the same story as the Greek one when they were never talking to each other. Like, how could that?
So what is it that, so let's, like, for just a few seconds, what is it that people say? So there's cultural diffusion,
Yeah.
right? That's what we're saying. So, or there's independent discovery, or because human beings, see things, if we look up at the stars, we could maybe see similar patterns, or, you could say that, similar outcomes because we're all human and we process things in human ways. But I'm with you. I think this is more of an ancient thing that seems to have been at the heart of our human species mythos from the very beginning. From like Paleolithic, Stone Age, 40,000 years ago, before the ice caps melted and the oceans rose. It seems to be part of human storytelling for as long as it's been.
And that would mean that in our mythologies, we share a deep-rooted connection to everybody, right? Regardless of language or race or skin color.
Well, yeah, I do think that, the interesting thing about the Pleiades versus the Big Dipper, or the Great Bear, and it's a really good one, and I'm glad you picked it, is they both have 7 stars. They're both they possibly as old as the Pleiades. It could be, but you can't see the Big Dipper from the southern hemisphere. Right. You can see the Pleiades, because it's the Pleiades is I guess it's like the Milky Way. You can see it from everywhere, and anyway, so that's really awesome, and so that's why I actually asked, I was like, why? There was a moment where I was like, I wonder how many Southern cultures look at the Big Dipper. And I'm like, oh, I'm a dummy. That's right.
Yeah, because you can't see the Big Dipper or Polaris from down there.
Australia can't see the Big Dipper, and there's that's not the North Star. They use the Southern Cross to find north, and so it's a completely different sky. Well, not completely different. There's the Milky Way. There's lots of constellations that you can see, but one of them you can't see is the Big Dipper and the Bear.
Let me ask you a different question, and then we can talk about the sun. But why do you think people, when they look at the stars, are so like always and everywhere need to find patterns?
So there's 2 things. I was going to say, like, just behind constellation making is that human beings, and this doesn't answer your question, but it gets towards it. Human beings do 2 things really well, and they love stories, narratives. They tell stories, and they find patterns. We find patterns, and I think this is part of. This is where we're talking about the autonomic nervous. We're talking about evolution and psychology and things. Capacities of our minds that we.
Sam.
Yes.
You're getting.
I'll stop there.
Well, no, I don't want you to stop there.
Oh.
But you're coming through a little. The mic is a little wonky.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, human beings love stories, and we seek patterns.
Right. And I think that this is, I'm going to just say this. I think that human beings have like instincts, what people would just call instincts. And it's not that's like, a taboo word to use, in a classroom, but that I can tell you, I'm about to have a baby in a couple of weeks. Babies have instincts.
Not you yourself.
Well, I mean, I'm doing a little bit of the work. And my wife's doing most of it.
You're handing out cigars.
No, but thank you. Yeah, I wish it were just cigars that I had to do. That would be cool. If I was just on cigar duty, I mean, I would, yeah. No, it's great. It's wonderful. But we have instincts, and we see patterns. We have things. I almost don't want to get into it because it's like it's too much. It's sort of silly to talk about a mythology class. But pattern recognition, the love of stories and narratives. I read a book last summer explaining why history is all wrong because it's so biased, because human beings love stories rather than facts. They have to rethink how to tell history. You know, it's this sort of, you know, how people come out with books like that, like, you know what we've been doing wrong? Yeah. And so there's this whole theory about how the love of human storytelling just is so basic to just being human that I don't know what else to say besides that. I mean,
even without mythology, if you just broaden the category, I mean, we spend how much time watching television shows and movies and listening to story. I mean, we, you know, even though our mythologies may many times belong to the past, we're still creating stories like it's the most important thing we do.
And I would like to point, this is talking about sort of the theory of mythology. So a mythos, a myth, is the Greek word for a story. A logos is a word for an account, right? One of the things that you can do, if you're talking about telling stories, a logos would be like an academic paper or a government pamphlet about water, purification. And a mythos is like watching Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Right. That like really, and it's entertainment, and it's a story that you would tell, and it has, and here's what is a myth? A myth is a story that has collective meaning. Everyone agrees that. Everyone, academics at least agree with that. They don't agree on much else besides their stories with collective meaning. And collective means there needs to be a group.
Yeah.
Of some kind. And they're powerful. Myths have been used to do lots of things. Because they are powerful, they're used to do, like, there are words like justifying narratives. So, you know, you can make a myth that justifies why these are the way we do things, or this is the way things are, all these kinds of things. And they explain the things that are, we don't know why they're that way. We just kind of explain that this is the way things are because, you know, the great turtle or the dragon or whatever.
That's you can also look at like history as being a myth, just in terms of American history. I mean, because when I was a kid growing up, we learned the story of America and Thomas Jefferson and the Puritans and the Revolutionary War and then the Civil War and then, you know, Yosemite and California. And we just, when we told that story, we did not talk about the individual Native American tribes that just got freaking steamrolled by Western civilization. We completely ignored it. So yes, we were telling quote unquote history, but we were also telling a particular myth about history, right? Because of what we excluded, we weren't being perfectly objective about everything that happened. We left a lot of crap out, and coincidentally, it was a lot of crap that made us look bad.
Right. I think it is. Anytime you tell a story, you're selecting. You have a purpose. You're selecting the things you want to say. You have a point. Unlike our talk today, not really much of a point, kind of just rambling, just all over the place. There was a point. So can I give you an example of an actual American myth? It is the one that everyone knows to be false. Is it Washington Irving wrote that Columbus knew that the earth was round, but the dumb Catholics at the university thought it was flat. Right. And he triumphantly showed through his, daring and and his, you know, blah, 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 and God blessed him, and then, you know, and he predicted an eclipse. Okay, yeah, so what really happened was everyone knew the earth was spherical. The Greeks knew, everyone knows. They knew for a long time. It wasn't a debate about whether the earth was flat or spherical. It was about the size of the earth. It was about whether or not how big the earth was.
Yeah.
Can you go from Spain to Japan and not die in the ocean?
Yeah.
And Columbus argued incorrectly that the earth was incredibly small and that he could do it. And the only thing that saved him was that there was the Caribbean was between him and Japan, and he didn't die.
There was some
what actually happened.
Yeah.
The only biography in English used in America until the 1950s was written by Washington Irving.
Yeah. So that reminds me of another.
Yeah.
That reminds me of another American myth, which is George Washington and the cherry tree.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
that's like a folktale.
Well, it is. And so there was and it was from a biography, and it said, you know, the story is that George Washington's father said, you know, George, I'm going to go away for a while. Don't chop down that cherry tree. And so he went away, and George, I guess, had a thing about chopping down cherry trees.
Yeah.
So he went out there and whacked that thing down. And his dad came back and said, George, did you do what I told you not to do? And he said, the father of our country, this indicates what kind of people we Americans are. Father, I cannot tell a lie. I did. And we know that story is made up because the guy who wrote the biography of where that story is found, he said he was interviewed like 10 years later, like, I just made that shit up. I don't know. It's just, you know, yeah. So it's like, it's a myth. It didn't happen.
That's a justifying narrative. It's a
justify. Yeah. It's meant to inculcate something about what it means to be a true American.
Yep.
We don't lie.
And it doesn't have anything, it's just, it has a point. Anyway, so we don't need to get caught up in American, you know, modern American politics and post-colonial.
Why not? We got 20 more minutes. Why not?
We got 20 more minutes. We haven't talked about anything.
All right, so tell me a Sun story. So
here's my Sun story.
Your name isn't actually Sam.
My name is my name is Shamash, which is the Babylonian sun god from Mesopotamia. In Sumerian, it's Utu or something like that. It's just my mother thought she was interesting or something, but
she went to Berkeley. Your mom went to Berkeley, right?
My mom went to Berkeley, didn't graduate. We have that in common. I didn't go to Berkeley, but I definitely didn't graduate. So,
yeah.
No, but and you know, she named my sister's middle name after a moon goddess and stuff. So she had intent. But the sun god story, I did the progression of the sun because I thought it was a really interesting thing. So it's not just about the sun or a sun god. Or the story about how the sun was made, but kind of an interesting part of myth. One of the things that's really interesting for me is how people thought about the sun rising, going through the day, setting, and then coming back. And I think it's really interesting because it points back to the way everyone, and I would say everyone because, and I'm going to go back to Australian Aboriginals, if I could, with this. So I have two versions. I have the Egyptian, and I have a very summarized version of the Australian version. And so the world was imagined as the Earth being like a plate, a disc.
This is from Egypt. Is this from Egypt?
This is everywhere.
Okay.
This is the Australian Aboriginal one, and it's the Egyptian one. And it's the Mesopotamian one, and it's the Finnish one, except for there's a tree. And so it is the same thing if you go back far enough. It's the Earth is a disc that's held up on a turtle's back. It's like, well, the Earth is always a disc, right? So the Earth seems to be in a lot of these cultures. Of course, you can go and find an example where it's not, and I'll be wrong. But the Australian version is that the sun is a woman who awakes daily, and so imagine that she's like in a camp, and she wakes up in the morning, and she lights her fire, and she makes her tea or whatever, whatever she does, and she gets up and she lights her fire and she starts crossing the sky, like literally. So she's just that's who she is. She crosses the sky. She comes down. She paints herself with red ochre, and like if you see the pictures of the Australian Aboriginals with their with the body paintings and with the white and black and sort of rust colored, and she goes across the sky, and she sets, and she goes and goes underground and comes back to the east, and when she goes under the world, she warms the world and causes plants to grow. And comes back and kind of does this cycle, and it's a very, and the moon is a man. So I guess this, the sun and the moon are often, when you talk about processions, they're very closely tied, so you almost can't tell them apart. You can't tell the story without telling both. But the moon is associated with the female sun's menstrual cycle, and so the moon and here's an interesting thing I didn't know. A solar eclipse is sometimes understood as the sun and the moon uniting together, which is the only example I've ever heard where that's not a horrible, terrifying experience for anyone. So, everyone else thinks it's a really terrifying thing.
So that's like, and when you say they're uniting together, that's like copulation?
Yes.
That's so cool. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Every other culture is like when there's an eclipse, everybody freaks the hell out.
And so I have a different version that's not as, and then they're just loving and hugging it out, man. No, they're not hugging it out. So that's, I think, the Australian Aboriginal version. It shows that the idea of what the world looks like. That that we're on a disc, that there's this progression into the sky dome and then down underneath the world, and underneath the world could be tunnels, it could be a snake, it could be an ocean. It's a great deep. And so the Egyptian version is, imagine the exact same world, except everything is a god. So the sky is a god, not the sky god, and that was separated from the earth god. What is it? Geb. And by their father, of course. And so this makes the dome. So you have the earth is the disc and the sky is the dome, and dad's in between, keeping them apart. The sun, and it's the same thing. The sun, you go up and over the sky, come down, go under the earth, and come back. But here's the story of the Egyptian, very advanced sun god worshiping version of the story. Advanced as in they worship the sun at a high level. It's not just a god or a natural phenomenon.
Yeah.
So the sun god Re was the original king of earth and of everyone and of all the gods, and ruled everyone justly, and it was a golden age. Does that sound like a golden age with a sun god ruling? And then slowly the sun god gets old and kind of doesn't do his job anymore, and it's not a golden age anymore, and the human beings who are also on this planet, are assholes and jerks, and and he decides he doesn't want to be here anymore, and he ascends, leaves the earth and ascends and becomes this, the sun. And so now here's the procession part. He rides the boat, the river bark, up and over the sky, and at each, and there's 12 hours, right? They just break everything down in 12 hours of darkness, 12 hours of light. And at each different o'clock, at noon, in the morning, he's this different version of a god, kind of like in the morning, it's youth and energy. And by nighttime, he's an old man and a ram, and he's about to go into the underworld. And so he changes his godly association in his name. And he goes through the sky on this boat, and the stars are gods that help take him down into the underworld. And on this boat, you can have pharaohs and all these things. But when he gets to the underworld, it gets dangerous, and he has to basically fight his generic enemies, and then the snake Chaos. But first, he has to meet Osiris, who is the god of the underworld and of rebirth, and the sun god unites with Osiris and becomes one god, and then they go and they defeat Chaos, but they do not kill Chaos, and Chaos could be a snake. or a dragon, or even the Ouroboros, the snake biting its own tail. And then the sun god has to fight and defeat chaos through magics and tricks and wars just to be able to rise again. And then rises again and does it all over again. Every single day. Anyway, and this kind of myth is in so many cultures. Anyway.
So the one I picked for the sun is, you know, it connects to that. I have a feeling like pretty much everything we do is just going to connect like this. It's kind of all just one big story. But there was Carl Jung, who really kind of laid the foundations for Joseph Campbell and a lot of modern Western thinking on psychology. But he kind of got famous, and he decided to go on a tour of the United States, and he stopped in New Mexico, and this was in 1930s, I want to say, something like that, 20s or 30s. And he met this this Hopi chief, and his name was Ochwe Bianu was his name, but that translates to Mountain Lake. So the guy's name was Mountain Lake, and he just was really fascinated by this guy. Jung is the founder of Jungian psychology, but there's a term that he invented, and you and I should talk about this later when we have Q&A, Sam, but the term archetype. Yeah, we're going to need to talk about what an archetype is. But Jung was interviewing Ochwe Bianu, and they were talking about the sun. And he was a Hopi, so I think either New Mexico or Arizona, somewhere around there. Very traditional indigenous religion, very, very old. But Ochwe Bianu said that the sun is God. And Jung was kind of perplexed by that. He said something like, "You ever wonder if the sun might just be a fiery hot ball of helium in the middle of the solar system?" Or something like that. Yeah. And Ochwe Bianu looked at him like he was just like this very dim-witted child. And he said, "The sun is God. How can anything be without the sun? Without the sun, it would be dark. There would be no life. We would have nothing. There would be nothing. There could be nothing without the sun. The sun is God." And Jung came back and said, "Well, do you think maybe the sun was produced by God?" And he just was immovable. He said, "The sun is God." And the Hopis had this ritual, these prayers they would say every morning. And they considered themselves to be children of the sun. That's what their name for themselves was, the children of the sun. And they would have these prayers in the morning that they believed actually made the sun itself rise and circle across the sky. And they believed that if they didn't do those prayers, the sun would stop moving across the sky and the world would devolve into chaos and darkness.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of thing, it's hard for us to understand as people who were born into, having all of the information about the world handed to us. But where does the sun go? The first kind of astronomy is that they've noticed is some of the earliest is, where does the sun rise and set, and when does that happen? And there's a lot of practical reasons for that. But I mean, the basic anxiety of, is it going to come back? Did you piss off the sun god? Or, so the Egyptian version of the solar eclipse is that the chaos snake swallowed the sun. That's not cool. That doesn't feel, chaos won? Okay, this is going to be a good harvest, I guess. No. Blood will be shed, kings will be toppled, pharaohs.
No, but that's a really interesting point. That's a very basic question that people before our time just would not have had the answer to. And, I've come across these questions every once in a while, and they seem trivial, but they're not. And the question is, where does the sun go? That's actually a really good question for people who don't know.
I mean, I was trying to come up with my own things, and I was like, yeah, the disc thing sounds pretty good to me. I don't know. So I'll give you an example of how just knowing what an eclipse is changes history. So the Peloponnesian War, when Athens and Sparta fought each other, they had a battle in Sicily at Syracuse to see who was going to win. And if Athens lost, they were essentially going to lose everything. You can imagine this. And if they won, they would probably win the war. So you know they were doing this strategic withdrawal at night on a full moon to surprise the enemy. They're doing this maneuver, and then there was a lunar eclipse, and this was I forget the year. It's 4 something, or right. So it's just the only thing that's important is the relative date. You don't have to remember the history at all. Everything went to shit. They lost their minds. They quit everything. They were all slaughtered. There was like one survivor. You know, Athens, the plague hit. The Spartans won. They killed Socrates. Everything happened bad because the moon went away. That's what happened.
Like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Huh?
Right. Just and then there was another battle. It was 100 years later, but they understood in preparation for the battle that a lunar eclipse was just or it was a solar eclipse, and it was just the shadow of the moon on the sun, because they had figured that out by then. And it was the same.
So then they didn't freak out and they kicked the other person's ass and.
Yes, and exactly. And then what they did, they continued their drinking party. They and then they went to and they won. And so literally in the same culture, I mean, the same kind of thing. If you just understand that the world isn't ending, the anxieties of these human beings and the anxieties of the communities, this is an actual example of what mythology does.
Well, it also takes away the power of the priests, right? The priests and the religious leaders are the ones who say, "Oh, come give us your money and pray to us, and we'll make sure that, you know, everything works out okay." Like as
well, it just depends on who's better at using the myths, and I think that's who's better at wielding the tools.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's another sun story. It's true that it seems to me it's true that most of the time the sun's a guy and the moon's a female, and I think that the moon's a female because she's associated with the menstrual cycle, that women menstruate in connection to the moon. In fact, the word menstruate, the first syllable men, comes from moon. It's the same linguistic root. But in the Australian version and in the Japanese version.
The Japanese version is so good that I just don't know it well enough to tell it. And I don't know how to say the words.
Yeah, I know it well enough. So Izanagi was one of the culture heroes, and he came back from visiting his wife Izanami, who was in the underworld, and he purified himself, and in the process of purifying himself, he gave birth to three sort of basic deities. One of them was Amaterasu, which is one of his eyes, and she's the sun goddess, and the other one is Tsukuyomi, I believe, and he was the moon.
Yeah,
he was the other eye, and then Susanoo was the nose or the breath or whatever. And so 3 children from Izanagi, there was both the eyes and the nose. And Amaterasu and Susanoo, he was the nose god, that was the god of the storms and the wind and the seas. And it's Japan, right? So, I mean, it's cold and cloudy and windy and, you know, dangerous and stuff. And so he was not very well liked, Susanoo, whereas Amaterasu, the sun goddess, she was beloved because when the sun comes out, it's beautiful in these northern climates and stuff. And the story is they would get in fights, and one time they got in a fight, and she was so upset that she went into a cave and she wouldn't come out. And they had to do all these rituals, and they actually tricked her by used a mirror. She had never seen her own reflection before, and they held up a mirror, and when she started seeing how beautiful she was, she started emerging out of this cave, and then they grabbed hold of her and pulled her all the way out. But
that's how they got you, Jason?
That's how they
got you out of the cave, huh?
That's childbirth, right?
They just held up a mirror and you crawled out.
Yeah, they're gonna pull your daughter out like that. But that also, it speaks to the same kind of anxiety that people had, right? That the sun disappeared, and what would we do if the sun actually didn't come back or actually disappeared?
Yeah. I mean, and so these fundamental anxieties, and you can imagine them writ large on a community level. And when you start thinking of
Yeah.
lots of people worrying about the same thing at the same time, it can get pretty crazy. I don't know if people ever notice that,
Oh man.
but I mean, having a way to explain why and how it works, and sometimes it's close, right? I mean,
Yeah.
depending on what type of myth we're talking here, but it really is good. So that's more of like we can talk about a function of myth, and what does it do for the people? It's not just in an entertaining story necessarily. This isn't necessarily just a justifying narrative, though it might be part of the royal family of Japan or something like that. But it has a lot to do with its effect on the communities and the individuals, and just saying this is how the world is. You can be assured in this level of regularity. This is how it works. This is what we in Mesoamerica. We have to have the sun rise by sacrificing blood. That's how we do it. The sun rises with blood.
Oh, you're talking about the Aztecs and what Huitzilopochtli and the war god, right?
Right, and then there's the what is it? I love the story of the twins, the hero twins, and how the hero twins fight, in the underworld, and they rectify everything, and then sort of save humanity and all this kind of thing, and then these hero twins, after doing that, after playing the most awesome game of soccer, football,
the ball game, yeah.
The most deadly, and then one became the moon, one became the sun, and anyway, that's a cool story that I don't know that well. That's very interesting, and also they worshipped the sun in the Incan, the Mayan, and the Aztecs, where most cultures didn't worship the sun. It's very rare, actually. It's interesting.
Yeah.
But yet the same, whether they worship it or it's just the Australian Aboriginal cultural beliefs or songs, it seems to be very, very much the same thing. It's answering the same questions anyway, which is interesting to me.
Well, the Hopi story I told earlier about Ochuevianu, that's definitely in the same line as the Aztec. It's all New World, Middle American indigenous stories, and he was adamant. I mean, no, the sun is God, and his reasoning is really interesting. If there is no sun, there is nothing, and that he's right. I mean, that's not wrong. If the sun just disappeared, we owe all of life.
Well, what do they call it in science? That's like when the sun eventually changes and it reaches like an extinction level, it turns into like a red giant and swallows us.
Yeah.
And then eventually the universe possibly will go into a heat death in whatever billion years. It's like, yeah. So it's like, well, it's just, it could,
Yeah.
That's just how we want to think about it.
It's a billion years, so we got time.
Yeah.
So we don't have, that's an interesting point that I never really probably would have come to on my own, but the fact that the uncertainty of existence does show up in a lot of these old stories, right? They can't go to a freaking supermarket and buy a pack of chicken when they're hungry. They gotta go catch that little bastard. Or they the food and just the basics of survival are an open question for them, that in ways that they are not for most of us.
Absolutely, and I think that when you start looking at religion and rituals and practices in general, all throughout history, it's like a long series of good luck charms for a lot of people. I mean, like, I don't mean to belittle religion. I'm a religious studies major or anything, but like, there's a way to look at it in the same way that, if you hit a home run, you never change your socks again or something, like, whatever people have, like lucky charms, literally. They do the same thing the same way, it's going to happen the same way. Or if they do this, must not appease the gods. And so they do something. And if they get a result, we find patterns where patterns don't actually exist. We have, hyperactive agency detection, hyperactive pattern detection systems, that these are things that are posited in some kinds of psychology and you know, stuff like that, these are fundamental in the human psyche or mind through
Well,
evolution.
they have survival. They have survival value. I mean,
Right.
when we understand patterns, when we're walking, you know, out in the woods by ourselves, and we understand that a certain, you know, sound of a branch snapping is not a threat, and then a different kind of sound of a branch snapping is a threat. Like, we have to have patterns so that we can sort of function psychologically in a survival sense, right? I mean,
Pattern recognition, I think, I don't know how fundamental it is to learning, but in the very basic sense, if you're set up with no inputs, you don't have any information on your environment, but you have pattern recognition, you have memory, so you can do something, see what happens, go back and do it again, see what happens, go back and do it again, see what happens. That's how learning works. I mean, it is fundamental, and so learning is also adapting, right? So human beings can learn, and we can culturally learn. And so you want to talk about adaptive, our anxiety system, our amygdala, all our pattern recognition thing. I mean, you know, we're animals designed to, not designed, but that have these things that have allowed us to survive in this environment. And we do it with things like pattern recognition and even when it tells us, like, so when it tells us the wrong answer, but the result is that we live, that thing can continue.
yeah.
So it's the fire detector effect. If you have a thing that tells you that branch that broke is a lion, but it's not, you live. If that branch that broke, you think it's not a lion, but it was, you die. And so if you always think that branch is a lion, you're more likely to live, which tells you, like, if anyone has problems with anxiety.
I was going to say, that kind of explains the whole entire modern world, doesn't it?
Like, holy hell.
Isn't it nice for everybody to know that all their anxieties keep them alive, though?
Thank you, anxiety. Thank you, amygdala, for making me both miserable and alive.
For keeping me alive to experience the misery of daily existence.
And it's the sweet nectar. It's the grape that's turned and becomes wine, you know?
Yeah. Well, we should go to cameras on and work on the study guide a little bit and see if anybody has questions or comments or anything they want to add to this. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll go ahead and start my video, and if other people can, that would be helpful as well. You know, thoughts or comments or questions. So I'm going to have this. This document that we're going to base our quiz off of, and I'll be working on it. I'll do a share screen in a second, but first I'm going to put it in the chat. But let's just see if anybody has any comments about anything or questions or anything at all.
Well, it was definitely interesting to hear what your guys' thoughts were, just going back and forth. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah, we'll be doing it the rest of the semester, I think. So. Ashley, any questions or anything that, you know, came up or?
No, I just found it really interesting to hear you both go back and forth and like relate all these stories from different cultures to each other.
Yeah, well, that was our thought when, I mean, we would talk on the phone and drink. You know, I would drink. He doesn't drink, but I would, and we would just talk for 3 hours, and I just thought somebody needs to record this stuff. You know, as we stumble into some interesting things. So this gives us a really cool opportunity to do that. Jack, any questions from you?
Not really. I agree with what the others have said, that I really enjoyed listening to you guys go back and forth, and I'm sitting in the office or back office at work and have just been taking notes, and it's been really interesting. Yeah.
Good. Well, so we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna be doing this every week, so we can get. So I'm really glad you're all here. I would wish that more students would come. Maybe they will after they are forced to watch a recording of it and realize they have to do it one way or another. But I'm going to put this share screen on, which is a quiz. I'm going to make a quiz off of that conversation that we just had, and maybe you guys can help me make it actually. But the first term was cosmology, and that just means cosmos means universe, and logos means, like Sam said earlier, account of. So it's stories about how the universe, came into existence. And almost all mythologies have some kind of cosmology. Our modern cosmology is the Big Bang theory, or the Big Bang cosmology. That's also a cosmology. It tells the story of how 14.3 or 13.8 billion years ago, everything bloomed into all of creation. We talked about the Australian Aborigines. Sam had some material from there, and I had some material from there as well. But I think what I would like you to know is that they arrived in Australia 40,000 years ago. And they have a very, I don't want to use the word primitive because it's not right. I mean, that's just not the right way to think about it. But a very, very old.
I've heard it called the oldest continuous tradition of any community in existence. So you don't have to call it primitive. It has the longest history. It has a continuous history that has been relatively the same longer than any community or culture of human beings on the earth that as far as anthropologists know of.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard, yeah. So.
And the coincidence of when Western European discovered them, when they showed up, there were a bunch of Brits and they all had their notebooks and they're like, oh, Chip, what's the story there? And they would write all that crap. They wrote all that crap down, in its original form practically, right? So when we read or hear the Aboriginal stories, they go back farther in time than any other myth system in the world. So I have Polaris. Sam, add stuff in if you want to get stuff out. This is just the North Star. And it's associated with the bear, right? The bear.
Yeah. The bear, the Big Dipper. The North Star is in the Ursa Minor, which is the little bear, but you can't see it. You can't see any of that stuff. All that anyone ever sees is the Big Dipper, which is the Great Bear, and it points towards the North Star. Basically. And
then Artemis, she's the Greek goddess of the wilderness, right?
Yeah, the wild hunt and virginity, and just very, very much, a hunter and the wilderness, and
she's like, who's that girl in the Hunger Games?
Katniss.
Oh,
yeah.
Is she based on that? Is she based on Artemis?
I don't know, but they're kind of the same. Katniss Everdeen is kind of like Artemis.
Yeah, Artemis is not to be fucked with, basically.
No. So these were two concepts that I think are really, really important and maybe a little bit hard to define. But both cultural diffusion and archetypes kind of touch on this. But diffusion is when stories are told by word of mouth and they spread, right? So I tell Sam tells his wife tells her friend tells her dad tells a Japanese business partner, and all of a sudden the story is being told in Tokyo, right? That's, we would refer to that as diffusion. The stories diffuse or spread by word of mouth, and not just in one moment in time, but also through history, also through historical time. And that's a little bit different from a different theory of where these stories come from, right? So when you were talking about Polaris and how the Finnish story and the Native American story are so similar, you would say, okay, way back before the Native Americans walked into this North and South America, there was a story of the bear and the hunter being told, and they took that with them. And the people who started Finland took it with them, and the stories spread that way. That would be a kind of diffusion. But there's a different kind of thing, and you referred to this a little bit early on when you talk about instincts, but that we have as the human psyche has these archetypes, these basic, like, I don't know, like Lego.
You can think of it in an inaccurate way as sign response, like symbol. You see something and you know what it means. Like you know that the red cross means one thing and a green cross means another thing. Like or you know what is, like you kind of understand what it means, and it means on a deep level, and that's more instinctual. Like if you're scared of snakes, regardless, that is. But it's more than that. That's sort of the instinctual system. Archetypes have been called elementary ideas, or an archetype. Just to explain the word is so it means old or original. Arche is old or original, or it also means ruling because it's old or original. And a type is just the type. So it's sort of this fundamental theme or category that that seems to, it's a way that you can analyze stories across cultures.
Using examples is probably helpful. Give me an example of an archetype, and I'll give you one, and let's just come up with a couple of them.
Okay, so
I'll give one first while you think about it. So like the old man in the story, who's the wise person who helps the young hero or whatever. Their trials and tribulations. Whether it's Obi-Wan Kenobi or, I mean, Gandalf, or, I mean, there's like, I'm sure there's one for Harry Potter, right? Dumbledore, is that right? I don't, but yeah, there's always this old figure, usually a guy, not always, but they appear in stories all over the world, all throughout time. And so that is a kind of archetype, right? It's a basic figure or type of character in a story that just appears everywhere.
Right, like the monster is an archetype, or there's so many different things. And the importance is, how do I say this? So it's not that there's one set of cultural symbols that are like universal. It's that there are things that evoke universal responses. So that's the case, right? Yeah. So it's not that, like, it's not like the Christian cross is seen the same way in every culture, right? So, but it's that it's like a sign stimulus response, that these mythic stories on a deep level evoke responses from us that are the same, or generally the same across cultures, right? So they alleviate anxieties in similar ways. They tell you how the structure of life and how life is going to be for you. They tell you how to deal with something when something hard comes about. They tell you what it's like to struggle. And so, you know, like the hero is an archetype. The hero going on a journey is the archetype, right? And so myths do all these things, but they can only do them because there is, for me, in my head, now this is just what I think, and people disagree, that there are some universal responses to these situations. And it's basic. It's like, we don't want to die. Where does the sun go? When you grow up, you go through the stages of life, and it all comes out of that, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Well, so I think I would like the students to know that, you know, as you can tell, archetype is a really hard thing to define, but it's a really, really, really important word in talking about myths. So when you find myths for yourself, you can ask yourself, are there any sort of, what would an archetype in this particular story or this particular myth do? Or how would I think in terms of elemental human ideas? And the key point there is the transcend culture, right? They're not bound to language, they're not bound to history, they're not bound to a particular culture, but that there's in some sense, kind of universal human responses to either physical objects or emotions, or
like mother, father, death, eating, the hunt. I mean, the bear is an example of the wild hunt. That's
Yeah.
why we're talking the chase, the wild hunt, the abduction. These are things that, you know, but these are things that I'm telling you, if you get abducted, you're going to feel the same things being taken away from your family as any other person. I mean, you're a human.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if you can't eat and you think you're going to starve, you're going to feel the same kind of, you know, if you think the world's going to end, like, so I think that that's the kind of universal. That's why I say instincts, because
Yeah.
I think it's just a response that you don't get to control necessarily. It happens, and then you got to deal with it,
Yeah.
which is the hard part, right?
Well, and death, and then there's death.
And then there's death. How do you deal with the ultimate anxiety? I think, and this is my theory, and you don't know, you don't want to remember this, but that the anxiety system in our bodies, it is evolutionarily designed to get us to avoid dying so that we can continue making life. And that means anxiety at its fundamental root is designed to stop you from dying. And that is the fundamental anxiety. It's that, and then everything around that is to, and then now of course that's just, I'm just a guy in my garage. but I like,
Just-
don't test him on this.
I'm just,
But like, that's my like,
yeah.
when the scientist comes out with this shit, all of you, everyone watching now goes, he called it. I just want, he called it right. That's it.
I heard the guy in the garage say it first.
He didn't do any work. He didn't write anything down, but he said it to a bunch of people in his garage.
So I wanted to, because it touches on this idea of constellations, and also really kind of touches on the idea of archetypes. I keyed in on a phrase that used hyperactive pattern detection. That makes it sound like it's a bad thing, like it's a condition. You know what I mean? It's probably, it's not necessarily a negative thing.
Put pattern detection system or something and remove the hyperactive. You know, you can just change the words and reframe it, make it sound better.
But this is the thing where you could see Jesus in a slice of cheese toast and the face in the moon and, you know, all of that stuff, right? That we look at something that is just nothing, but then we project patterns onto, in fact, I'm going to do it that way, projecting.
Yeah, it's almost like a pattern project system.
So, and what you said about the baseball players, I mean, baseball players and sailors are the most notorious, right? The most superstitious people on the planet. And if they do something once and it works, that's how they do it when they die, right? I mean, nothing ever changes from that.
Well, it makes sense in a ship because you put yourself in a situation where you don't have control, and you're at the mercy of the deep and the weather, and oh my goodness, and you can burn and drown at the same time, or starve and get diseases. Like, fuck.
I was gonna say, get
anxiety, man. You got to have anxiety relief if you're going to be in that situation.
Yeah, get scurvy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put, what other? Can you think of other things that we talked about that can go on this list? I'm gonna put Amaterasu, Japanese sun goddess.
Yeah, I didn't.
And by the way, if you students want me to write something down, that means you get a quiz question on it. So you're like, you'll know the answer. So if you could tell me something to put on the study guide, you pretty much get free points when you see it on the quiz.
Definitely do that.
Yeah.
What else is there?
I'm gonna put Ochwebi. Put Carl Jung on here. We'll be talking a lot more about Carl Jung throughout the course of the semester. He's the guy that kind of founded the idea of archetypes. Really influenced Joseph Campbell.
I want to say that we should come back and go back and think about archetypes and come up with like a better.
Okay.
It's not that difficult to think about. It's just that we're sitting here. It really isn't that complicated. It's just like, I feel like if you could compare it to like a flavor or a theme or something, or like, You know what I mean? It's just like it's a type of character that repeats in different costumes. You know, you have like if you could think of a Shakespearean type, like the idiot's really the wise man in everything. Anytime there's an idiot in a Shakespeare, he's really the one who knows everything, right?
Uh-huh.
Stuff like that. Like anyway, but I
Well,
just
yeah. No, that's a great point. We'll just say we're continuing as a class to define what archetype is, and we'll keep wrestling with it. It's not something that I'll make you memorize a definition for, because that's bullshit. Like, memorizing definitions doesn't mean that you understand or can use, the concept, right? You just memorize the definition, and you get little check marks and a golden sticker on your refrigerator, and mommy says, "Oh, you're so smart."
Yeah, well, Dylan just said, okay, archetype is simply, it's just a character or a story. It's a categorization that is pervasive culturally. And yes, it's a categorization of within a story, but and that is that's the easiest way to think about it. And we should just be able to make that shit. Maybe this class should have to come up with, do you guys come up with archetypes, and where do you think, do they exist?
Let's make the students do it. Why do we have to do it?
What the hell? I'm not a student anymore.
I'm gonna make Ashley do it. And Liam. No, she's like horrified. She's like, do not do that. Liam can do it. Liam and Jack. Come back with a definition of archetype. So we've got some stuff here. I'll write a quiz off this, then it'll be a 10-question quiz. So it looks like everything on the quiz. So more or less, the quizzes aren't really designed to trick you. Sam said something really cool to me, and I know we're kind of getting close on time. But Sam said something to me the other day that I thought was really cool, which is, he said, the education system has this sort of like idea, like we're going to trick you, or we've got something secret and you need to know it, and we're going to give you a test to make sure you are paying attention and stuff like that. And
we're going to play hide and seek with the knowledge, and then see if you studied the thing I didn't tell you.
Yeah.
You're here to help me learn. What is your
right?
I was in the Marine Corps. They didn't teach rifle marksmanship that way. I can tell you that.
No, that wouldn't be very helpful.
It's not helpful at all.
Were you able to find where we're keeping the bullets? No. Well, then you deserve to die. Yeah. So, I mean, I want this really to be very transparent, right? I mean, I want to give you guys stuff to learn, not because it's always the most important thing to learn, but just to kind of, track the fact that you're paying attention and that you're showing up and you're engaged. I mean, I always want to just make sure that students are engaged. And if they're engaged, I want them to, get 100% on everything. So, these quizzes aren't, the super secret kind of things that we talked about that you have to be paying a lot of attention to. I mean, I'll just write a quiz question right now. I'll be like, who's the Greek goddess of the wilderness, the wild hunt, and virginity? And I'll be like, Artemis, Zeus, Ochwe, Bianu. Like, it's not going to be really very complex, because I'm not interested in making mythology more complex. It's too interesting of a subject to get lost in the weeds.
And it's just stories. It shouldn't be more complicated. Yeah. It's just stories.
And I love what you pointed out, Sam, right at the beginning, that we are profoundly storytelling oriented. I'm way like the original point. Like, yes, we can study myths as this thing that happened in the past to different cultures, but our own culture is constantly creating stories, and we're watching them. We're paying attention. We love stories. And that's what this class really is. It's just about, let's look at some stories.
Well, if we don't let these people go, they're going to hate stories.
I know. We're going to have to do that.
They're going to start hating stories.
So, questions at all before I stop recording this thing? Let me get the stop share out of here. No other questions?
All good. That was great.
I'm going to stop the record button, and then we can stay on if you guys have anything you want to talk about off the recording. So.